How are empires experienced? A328. Unit 15, Sex, Gender and Empire. Before the master of the household fully decides upon taking so important a step as leaving his native land to become a settler in Canada, let him first commune with himself and ask the important question: Have I sufficient energy of character to enable me to conform to the changes that may await me in a new mode of life? Let him next consider the capabilities of his partner, her health, and general temper. For a stickly, peevish, disconnected person will make but a poor settler's wife. In a country where cheerfulness of mind and activity of body are very essential to the prosperity of the household. To wives and daughters, as soon then as the resolution to emigrate has been fixed, let the females of the house make up their minds to take a cheerful and active part in the work of preparation. Let them at once cast aside all vain opposition and selfish regrets, and hopefully look to their future country as to a land of promise, soberly and quietly, turning their attention to making the necessary arrangements. Let them remember that all the practical knowledge is highly valuable in the land to which they are going. An acquaintance with the homely art of baking and making bread, which most servants and small housekeepers know how to practice, but which many young females that live in large towns and cities where the baker supplies the bread to the family do not, is necessary to be acquired. Cooking, curing meat, making butter and cheese, knitting, dressmaking, and tailoring. Everything that is done in the house by the hands of the family is so much saved or so much earned towards a paying for the land, or building houses and barns, buying stock, or carrying on the necessary improvements on the place. The sooner this great object is accomplished, the sooner will the settler and his family realize the comfort of feeling themselves independent. I address this passage more especially to the daughters of the emigrant, for to them belongs the task of cheering and upholding their mother in the trials that they may await her. The young learn to conform more readily to change of country than the old. Novelty has for them a great charm, and then hope is more lively in the young heart than in the old. To them a field of healthy enterprise is open, which they have only to enter upon with a cheerful heart and plenty of determination. And they will hardly fail of reaching a respectable state of independence. It frequently happens that before the poor emigrant can settle upon the land of his own, he is obliged to send out older children out to the service. Perhaps he gets employment for himself and his wife on some farm where they can manage to keep the younger members of the family with them. There is a small house or shanty convenient on or near the farm on which they are hired. There is an error which female servants are very apt to fall into this country, which, as a true friend, I will guard them against committing. This is adopting a free and easy manner. Often, they are not bound to render their mistresses the same respect of manners as was usual in the old country. Now, as they receive more, they ought not to be less thankful to those that pay them well, and should be equally zealous in doing their duty. They should bear in mind that they are commanded to render honour to whom honour is due. A female servant in Canada, whose manners are respectful and well behaved, will always be treated with consideration and even with affection. But while I would recommend respect and obedience on the part of servant to her employer, I would say, treat your servant with consideration. Let me add yet a few words ere we part, on a subject that doubtless is very dear to you. I mean your church. You may be far from a church, and your opportunities may be few and far between of attending divine worship. Nevertheless, suffer not your God to be forgotten in the lonely wilderness. The first in which I bent my knee in heartfelt thankfulness to the Almighty for his saving care over me and my husband, in preserving us from the perils of the great deep, was in a log church of the rudest description. And now, farewell, and I trust you'll find kind hearts and friends and much prosperity in the land of your adoption, never forgetting that you will still belong to that land, which is the glory of all lands, and are subjects to a mild and merciful sovereign, who is no less beloved in their province of Canada than she is by her loyal people in Britain. Trowell's farm burned down. Her husband died a broken man, and she later moved into a house built by her brother. But her guides proved popular. By contrast, her sister Susanna Moody published Roughing It in the Bush or Life in Canada, 1852. With its tales of severe changes in both cases, it is legitimate to ask how far fashion and narrative that would sell shape their writing. You have an option to read more from them in the further study section. Domesticated colony, women in India. In an occupation colony, the challenge was different. For the middle or the upper class women, the officers, businessmen, and colonial servants' wife, publications urged them to see a running a colonial home as part of a domesticated empire and its subjects. Take Flora Annie Steele, who was married to a member of the Indian Civil Service. As we read the primary source, 1511, an extract from the complete Indian housekeeper and cook, write brief notes in response to the questions that follow. The discussion will highlight just a few of the points you might extract. How do Steele and Gardner view their Indian servants? According to the authors, how should the European housewife manage her servants and why? Housekeeping in India. When once the first strangeness has worn off, is a far easier task in many ways than it is in England, though it nonetheless requires time and, in this present transitional period, an almost phenomenal patience. For while one mistress enforces cleanliness according to European methods, the next may belong to the opposite faction, who, so long as the dinner is nicely served, thinks nothing of it being cooked in the kitchen, which is also used as a latrine. It is not necessary, or in the least degree desirable, that an educated woman should waste the best years of her life in schooling and petty supervision. Life holds higher duties, and it is indubitable that friction and overzeal is a sure sign of a bad housekeeper. But there is an appreciable difference between a carewoman, Martha, vexed with many things, and the absolute indifference displayed by many Indian mistresses, who put up with a degree of loneliness and dirt which would disgrace a den in St. Giles, on the principle that is no use attempting to teach the natives. They never go into their kitchens, for the simple reason that their appetite for breakfast might be marred by seeing the knit madga, male waiter, using his toes as an efficient toast rack, or their desire for the dinner weakened by seeing the soup strained through the greasy pagri. It was easy, however, as an actual housekeeping is in India. The personal attention of the mistress is infinitely more needed here than at home. There once the machine is well oiled and is set in motion. The mistress may rely on fairly even and regular work in here, a few days of absence or neglect to keep her eyes open, and she will find servants fall into their habits with inherited conservatism of dirt. This is, of course, disheartening, but it has to be faced as a necessary condition of life until a few generations of training shall have started the Indian servant on a new inheritance of habit. The first duty of a mistress is, of course, to be able to give intelligible orders to her servants. Therefore, it is necessary she should learn to speak Hindustani. No sane Englishwoman would dream of living, say, for 20 years in Germany, Italy, or France without making an attempt, at any rate, to learn the language. The next duty is obviously to insist on her orders being carried out. And here we come to the burning question: how is this to be done? Certainly, there is a present very little to which we can appeal in the average Indian servant, but then, until it is implanted by training, there is very little sense of duty in a child, yet alone a well regulated nursery's obedience is a foregone conclusion. The secret lies in making rules and keeping to them. The Indian servant is a child in everything save age, and should be treated as a child. That is to say, kindly, but with the greatest firmness. The laws of the household should be those of the Medes and the Persians, and the faults should be never go unpunished. By overlooking a first offence, we lose the opportunity we have preventing it becoming a habit. But it will be asked, how are we to punish our servants when we have no hold either on their minds or bodies? When cutting their pay is illegal, and few, if any, have any sense of shame, the answer is obvious: make a hold. In their own experience, the authors have found that a system of rewards and punishment perfectly easy to of attainment. One has for years adopted the plan of engaging her servants at so much a month, the lowest rate at which servant is obtainable, and so much extra backshish. To show what absolute children Indian servants are, the same author has for years adopted castor oil as an ultimatum in all obstinate cases, on the ground that there must be some physical cause for inability to learn or to remember. This is considered a great joke and exposes the offender to much ridicule from his fellow servants. To turn to the mirror duties of a mistress, it may be remarked that she is primarily responsible for the decency and health of all persons living in her service or compound. With this subject, she should insist upon her servants living in the quarters and not in the bazaar. But this, on the other hand, is no reason why they should turn your domain into a caravanseria for their relations to the third and fourth generation. And good mistress in India will try to set good example to her servants in routine, method, and tidiness. Half an hour after breakfast should be sufficient for the whole arrangement for the day. But that half hour should be given as punctually as possible. An untidy mistress invariably has untidy, a weak one, idle servants. In regards in regard to engaging new servants, written certificates to character are for the most part of no use whatsoever, except in respect to the length of the service and its implied testimony to honesty. A man who has been 6 or 7 years in one place is not likely to be a thief. Finally, when all is said and done, the whole duty of an Indian mistress towards her servant is neither more or less than it is in England. Here, as there, a little reasonable human sympathy is the best oil for the household machine. Here, as there, the end of this object is not merely personal comfort, but the formation of a home, the unit of civilization where father and children, master and servant, employer and employed, can learn their several duties. When all is said and done, Also, herein lies a natural outlet for the most of the talent peculiar to women. It is the fashion nowadays to undervalue the art of making a home. It is astonishing how few women know how to keep accounts, yet this is the first step towards economy, and a little method and care in this point saves infinite friction. One special fault which the authors believe besets most women in the habit of not showing all transactions on paper. There are nuances. The very exhortations suggest many European housewives did not live up to such standards. We know that many children were left for long periods with Indian servants, contrary to advice. Also, the authors argue that the whole duty of an Indian mistress towards her servants is neither more or less than it is in England, with an admixture of human sympathy necessary, and the same necessity to learn languages as if in Europe. Still and Gardner. Buetner argues that such advices reflects women's role in reproducing the imperial social formation, even in particular transferring that Buetner to natives. Some women also busied themselves with social, charity, hospital, or reformist work. After all, countering the potential boredom of living in a, to them, alien culture, far, far not just from family and friends, but often from facilities common to UK towns too. It could be challenging. Other women were employed as missionaries, later as nurses, though missionaries raised another issue. Missionaries and some other groups only supported the colonial state in so far as it aligned with their agendas, even if the missionary in part relied on imperial protection. Masculinity, manliness, and changing norms. So far, we have talked mainly about women, but how did models of masculinity change? Section 1 showed elite European men in the 18th century willing to enter into Indian world, and how has this declined in the period between 1800 and 1840 under an increasingly disapproving official gaze? The children of such unions increasingly went not into a European or Indian world as before, but become a distinct group of Eurasians. Similar cross-cultural mixing happened in other early empire and frontier situations, for instance, between fur traders and Native Americans. Such relationships could be contractual, exploitative, or at other times were deeply affectionate, but such open cross-cultural mixing declined as empire matured, and power was bureaucratized even more so as European women arrived in significant numbers. For occupation colonies where European women remained sparse, such as in rural Kenya, such interactions continued longer through concubinage, unofficially living with the local girls and women in rural posts without long-term commitment. Hyam suggested one of the attractions of colonies was precisely the chance to continue masculine behaviours increasingly curtailed at home. Victorian values of respectability reinforced this drift, especially after moral purity campaigns of the 1870s and 80s, when the age of consent in England was raised from 13 to 16 for girls. But lately, the Colonel's Office crew, circa of 1909, explored this increasingly restrictive morality, instructing Colonel officers not to take local mistresses that followed a scandal in Kenya, where an official got involved in a scrape with the policeman husband of one of his teenage concubines, and a European civilian reported him. The crew circa diminished the practice, even if it lingered for bachelors in commercial employment. Meanwhile, the stock of images of exemplary masculinity offered for public consumption was changing in emphasis, and for the mid 19th century, British public schools propagated a particular image, concubine and classical scholarship with Christianity, team sports with learning to lead others. This met the needs of the church, military, and empire alike, meaningless, including a sort of muscular Christianity, espoused by author Thomas Hughes. Increasingly included notions of ch- uh, ch- chivalry towards women, protecting their virtue and position as homemakers and mothers. and self-control and self-discipline. It was a moral perspective that ran counter to the permissiveness of the traditional double standard. It also required activists that were antithesis of increasingly prominent middle class Victorian notions of domesticity, hunting, war, exploration, adventure. In addition, homosexuals become more prone to persecution after a clause in the 1885 Criminal Law Amendment Act, mostly about the age and consent for females, outlaw virtually any male sexual contact, even in private, subject to up to 2 years imprisonment. Before British laws against sodomy, echoed by Indian Penal Code Section 377, and via that in other colonies, Singapore, for instance, had been draconian but difficult to prove and so relatively rarely prosecuted. The more all-embracing UK legislation in the UK was echoed in some colonies too. For instance, Singapore Section 377A of the Penal Code, similarly prescribing male and male sexual contact, was added as late as 1938, though originally used disproportionately against legal Asians who sold sex to Europeans, thought to make them later vulnerable to blackmail. It was endorsed by a deeply conservative post-colonial political elite and only finally repealed in 2022. So colonies turned from being out somewhere homosexuality could benefit from the homosocial world of barrack and club, and the opportunity facilitated by relative power and wealth to being relatively constrained. There have since been arguments about how far these changes left greater intolerance in ex-British colonies compared, for instance, to French colonies. France having decriminalised sodomy between consenting adults in 1791. Masculinity exemplary models. Now I want you to get a sense of how models of masculinity grew increasingly perfected over time by looking at Henry Havelock, a product of Charterhouse, one of the top public schools. He made his name in the Indian Army fighting in Burma, the First Afghan War, and in the Sikh Wars, 1845, published related accounts. He married a woman from a deeply religious family and encouraged religion and temperament among his men. But what turned him from a man to myth was the Indian Mutiny Rebellion of 1857 to 58. The killing of the British women and children by Indian rebels, notably a Cawnpore, and the threat of defeat fostered an intense emotional response in Britain. And Reprisal killing in India. Joseph Peyton's painting and memoriam shown at the Royal Academy in summer 1858 portrayed British women and children huddled around the Bible as sepoys, Indian soldiers, massed at the windows and the door of their cell. So, Viceroy was the response that in 1859 Peyton had the sepoys painted over the Highlanders, implying imminent rescue, retitling it in memoriam Henry Havelock. Havelock took part in the fight back, helping to relieve and then defend Lucknow from a siege. Contracted dysentery and died there on the 24th of November 1857. His last words to son and fellow officer Harry, supposedly were Harry, see how a Christian can die, by 1860, his brother. We'll keep that there, come back to that tomorrow. Thank you, God bless, speak soon, take care, goodbye.